So what each of you have in front of you is a Rubik's Cube. Because I find that the Rubik's Cube is the absolute best symbol and reminder of not only why communication is so important and how it can accelerate trust and avoid conflict and create greater personal awareness, and also it's how do we do it. So by the end of today, this is going to be that symbol for you that you can put this on your desk as a reminder of how important communication is and how to access it quickly just by the Rubik's Cube. And you may even want to go home and buy one at home, because communication is not only important at work, is it? So each side of the Rubik's Cube has a distinctly different color. And that is really to show us that we are part, if we are one of these sides and one of these colors, we're part of a whole. Whether it's our family, whether it's our work, whether it's our department, whatever it is, we're part of the whole. And these different colors might represent different people, different personality types, might represent different departments, different marketplaces, different products, right? It might represent a lot of different things that we interact with. But sometimes we get so caught up in ourselves that we don't step back and see the big picture and see how do we relate to the whole. If we have a problem, instead of getting stuck in the problem and being stuck within ourselves, when we step back, we have that huge advantage to be able to see all perspectives. So I also like to tell a study that I read, because I thought this was really interesting. They took 6-year-olds and they brought them in and they showed them the Rubik's Cube and they said, what color do you see? And they said what?
Yellow.
Yellow. Thank you for your participation. And then they said, what color do you think I see? And what do you think they said?
Yellow.
Yellow. So the instructor, proceeded to say, well, you see yellow, but as you can see, the Rubik's Cube has different sides, and on the opposite side of yellow is white. I see white, you see yellow. And he goes, oh, okay. And so the kids go away, and they play with blocks for 20 minutes, and then they come back. And then they say, what color do you see? And they say,
Yellow.
Yellow. Then they say, what color do you think I see? And they say,
Yellow.
see, we're mixed, right? Some people say white, some people say yellow. Interesting enough, for 6-year-olds, they do say yellow. And actually, my 15-year-old says yellow, too. Because it's all about them, right? It's all about them. Their whole world circles around them. There's not really a lot of thought around the big picture and what's going on. And that makes sense, because at 6, their executive function in their brain hasn't fully developed. So that's also how our brain functions. But the truth is that when we're stressed and we have outside stressors, like time, we talked about being away from the office, right? And the stress that can create. Time, money can create a lot of stress. Health situations or any other circumstance, what do you think happens to us? We go back to being focused on ourselves. And when we're focused on ourselves, we're limiting our perspective. That emotion that's kicked off keeps us in a narrow-minded place. And that's why it's harder to solve problems. It's more difficult to build trust and avoid conflict, because we're stuck in the problem. We become part of the problem. So we have to take regular time and focus to step back and look at where we are. What's most important right now? What are my priorities? Who and what am I interacting with? Where communication can absolutely boost productivity, or it can totally tear it down. So I was just a part of a reorganization with a direct marketing company, and we were selling off certain pieces of the organization and reorganizing. And through this process, I was working with the CEO of the parent company, who was a market research company. And after this whole reorganization was super successful, my boss from the CEO of the market research company, he came to me and he said, listen, I have a position for you to come on the executive team of the market research company, and I'm creating a new position for you for strategy and innovation, so strategic projects and innovation. And because the work we had done together, he was impressed, and we worked well together. And I was super excited. And all I could think about was me. I didn't realize that at the time. But I was thinking about, wow, this is a real elevation of me. This is a new position. This is greater pay. This is that corner office, and really I was super excited. And I was excited to work with the team, but I was a little bit focused on me. And through that focus on myself, I failed to realize that I hadn't actually interviewed with anyone else from the executive team, and I didn't know any of them. So I went on the basis that everyone was in agreement that this position would be created for me. So there's nothing worse than starting an organization and starting with everyone against you as you first start. And that's what happened. I'm super excited. I think we're going to do great things together. And I have up here toxic waste because it was a toxic environment. Because not only were they not included in that process, so my boss under-communicated with them. And sometimes we do that, and it creates fear, stress, mistrust when we either over-communicate or under-communicate. So we need to be aware of what's the right level for the context of what we're in. So not only were they upset, probably, that they weren't involved in that decision, but I didn't know that my boss, the CEO, was going to retire in 2 years. So that meant they were all vying for his position, which wasn't my ambition, but they didn't know that, so they saw me as a threat. And to add to this, this was in Switzerland, where it's a very male-dominated, chauvinistic environment, and so they weren't happy that this position was created for a woman. And I found all this out as I started. And so they blocked me every chance they got. I mean, you can imagine if I'm responsible for strategy and innovation, my projects cut across all the divisions. So in a matrix organization, I didn't have any direct employees working for me, so I had to influence, but I didn't have that direct report. So I counted on the division heads, which were these other executives, to release resources to me, to encourage these people to be a part of my projects. And they did just the opposite. They told them to give me as little time and energy as possible. If I came up with a new idea, it was always, you're an outsider, you don't know how it works here, we've tried that before. Everything that they could do to block my success. And so I'm a pretty positive, outgoing, upbeat person, and I normally would get out of bed and I'd be excited for the day, but not at this period in my life. I would get up, and before I'd even get to work, I'd be frustrated and depleted, because I knew the resistance that I was going to come upon day after day. It was like Groundhog's Day, like a bad one. And despite a positive attitude, that didn't help me, because there were other skills that I really needed. Because wherever we are, we get to where we are with the skills that we have, but we hit a plateau, just like in karate, like I said. We hit a plateau where those skills, maybe they don't work anymore, or they need to be applied differently. And so I didn't have the skills that I needed to deal with this situation. And it was very frustrating, and it was really lonely. Have you ever been in a situation that was toxic? Maybe it's a negotiation, or even in your family. Could be a conversation that you had to have. And just raise your hand so I can see, right? So you know how draining it is. And if you haven't been in one yourself or had a toxic situation, then you probably know someone else who had. And you could feel how draining it was for them. But because of karate, they drummed into my head that winners never quit and quitters never win. So quitting wasn't an option for me, right? The only way out was going to be through. And so in this situation, I decided I had to do something about it. So I went to my boss, and he was also noticing that it wasn't working so well with the executive team. And so he hired me a coach. And I worked with that coach, and that coach introduced me to behavioral psychology. And that made all the difference for me, because it made that those unconscious choices and reactions and emotions, it made all of that conscious. So now I was at a choice, right? I could choose the way that I wanted to show up because I was aware of it. And so that's what I want for you too, is a heightened awareness so that you can make a choice. Because the point of our thought, and that's why my TEDx is called The Energy of Thought, so you definitely want to check that out because it'll reinforce some of the things that we're talking about here, is that when we think about our thoughts, we actually have 70,000 thoughts a day. 70,000! That's crazy! And if you're under a stressful situation, you might even have more than 70,000. My brother, he's an analytical person, and he says he has 150,000, which he probably does. But the interesting fact is that scientifically they've seen that 5% of those thoughts are new. Only 5%. That means we repeat the same thoughts over and over again. So if we're not aware of what meaning we're giving a situation, or what expectations that we actually are putting on a person or a circumstance, then we're not a choice. I mean, we are, but we're not aware of it, right? So becoming more aware of that, especially the expectations, because that's going to impact our feelings, how we feel about the situation we're in. Do we take it as stressful and go into fight or flight mode? Or do we take it as a challenge? Or do we get curious? I know you can think of the difference that it would make is if you took something that it was personal and that it was an attack against you versus that it wasn't. So for instance, in a totally different context, one of the most difficult communication challenging situations is a divorce. I was in a divorce process, and because I had already had this experience with the management team, I was more self-aware and more emotionally intelligent. So I was really clear, what meaning am I giving this? And I felt betrayed. I mean, I'm not telling you that I didn't feel upset about the situation. But I chose to give it a different meaning. I chose, on one side I could say that he was a liar and a cheater, and on the other side I could say that he was the greatest mentor that I ever had. And so whatever story you repeat, that's the meaning that you give it, that's also how you're going to feel inside, and that's how you're going to show up. And I knew for my kids, in that particular situation, that I needed to be the bigger person, that I needed to do it for them, and I needed to show up in a certain way. And you can do that at home, and you can do it at work. You can be that example for other people. You can be that influencer, that leader. And it makes you feel good. I actually see it now as a personal principle to be the example. It drives me to be a better person. And because it's like a value or a principle, it makes decision making so much easier because it's already made for me. What's the right decision, not what's the easiest decision. So when it comes to our communication, it's the same thing. We have to give it more time, more energy, more thought. We need to step back and to evaluate it.